Hello students, this is Suchadata teaching economics and here I am with the third chapter of class 11 and the name of the chapter is Features, Problems and Policies of Agriculture. Now before we begin with the chapter, we have to understand what actually agriculture is all about. In fact, in a layman's term, agriculture is that economic activity from wherein we get food crops and non-food crops. That is to say, all that we eat and all that we indirectly use. So, all that is produced in the agricultural sector. But from the point of economics, as a student of economics, you must know that agriculture is the primary sector and in fact the backbone of Indian economy. It is from this sector that all other sectors thrive, increase or they actually increase their production. Now, next I am going to tell you about the importance of agriculture in the Indian economy. That is to say, why this sector occupies a very important position in the Indian society or economy. The first feature is that the contribution of agriculture to the GDP, that is the gross domestic product of the country, is almost 1/4. So, this sector occupies a pivot role in the GDP. It is from here that all the production is done forward. It is from here that most of the things are taken. So, its contribution to GDP makes it an important sector, but we also understand another thing, that if agriculture is giving so much of GDP to the country, this definitely means that the country has an underdeveloped economy. Because reliance of the country on the primary sector clearly indicates that the country still has to develop. The major contribution is coming from the primary sector and the secondary and the tertiary sector are yet to develop. So, it is indicating two factors. The second feature of the Indian agriculture is that it supplies wage goods. That is, the fodder crop, all is supplied by this sector. So, it provides food crop not only to the human beings, that is millions of them, but also to many animals. Thus, its contribution to the wage goods or its providing of wage goods is another important feature of Indian agriculture. The third feature is that this sector generates huge employment for the country. Almost 64% of the country's population is dependent on agriculture. This is what I am talking of direct employment. But otherwise, if you go further deep into it, even the indirect other employments are related to agricultural sector. But look at the fact and the figure that 64% of the Indians are employed in the agricultural sector. Next feature is that it provides industrial raw material. So, whether it is cotton, jute, oil seeds and so on, it is all provided by the agricultural sector. So, the raw material which is provided to the industries is the contribution of the agricultural sector of India. So, again as I said, it is the backbone of the Indian economy. The next feature is this sector is in fact contributing a lot to the international trade and also to the domestic trade. By the international trade, we are making lots of money, that is, forex is increased, and in the domestic trade also, we see that lots of things which are traded from one place to another, it's all the production of agricultural sector. The next feature of this sector is that it is considered as the economic fulcrum to transport industry. The transport industry of India has the major contribution coming from the agricultural sector, because whatever is transported from one place to another, it is all the agricultural products. So this transport industry is thriving because of the agricultural products. And the last and the important feature of Indian agriculture is that it is the wealth of the nation. Since land is a fixed asset and is the biggest asset in the country, it is definitely in the agricultural sector. So these were the features of Indian agriculture, or the importance of Indian agriculture. In the previous clipping, I spoke about the importance of Indian agriculture. In this, I shall be talking about the features of Indian agriculture. The first feature is that the Indian agriculture has low productivity. In spite of all the new measures which have been adopted, the Indian agricultural sector still produces very low. That is, the productivity per hectare is still very low compared to other countries of the world, though it has increased at a great margin from the earlier times. But still, there is a long way to go. The second feature of the Indian agriculture is that it has disguised unemployment. The disguised unemployment means the hidden unemployment. That is to say, at a place where just 2 people are required, there at least 8 or 9 people are employed. And it is generally because of the joint family systems in the rural areas, wherein the children, the grandchildren and so on keep on tilling the same land even though the number keeps on growing. So this economic feature is there of the Indian agriculture, that it has hidden or disguised unemployment. The third feature of the Indian agriculture is its dependence on rainfall. The Indian farmer still keeps looking at the sky and keeps wondering when will it rain. It does not still have the irrigation facilities, and thus rainfall plays a havoc in their role. That is to say, if there is a good rainfall, good productivity. If there is a bad rainfall, then the productivity is hardly anything. So the life of an Indian farmer keeps revolving on the monsoon. The next feature of the Indian agriculture is subsistence farming. Subsistence farming is that the Indian farmer still feels that his fields are meant to be providing the livelihood and the food crop to the family. So that's their basic idea about agriculture. They feel that the field should be able to give them the required number, or rather the food grains of the required number in the family. Thus, this traditional or this subsistence farming which is there is thus an important feature of the Indian agriculture. The next, which is correlated to this subsistence farming, is traditional inputs. That is, the Indian farmer, due to many reasons, is not able to come out of the traditional inputs. The manures, the fertilizers, the other seeds and other things which the Indian farmer uses is all very traditional. They yet have not been able to come up to the standards of new outputs for financial and other reasons. The next feature of the Indian agriculture is that in India, the agricultural farms are generally small in nature and they are scattered also. That is, one farm is at one place and another piece of farm is at a very far off place. Thus, small land holdings and scattered land holdings, by this the Indian farmer is not able to get the kind of output it should from the land. The next feature of the Indian agriculture is landlord-tenant conflict. This means the landlord and the tenant in the farm in India, most of the tilling is done by the tenant and the landlords are absentee landlords. That is, they keep sleeping. They are generally residing in the cities and the work is done by the tenant. And they try to extract as much as they can from the tenant. The tenant is forced to still till the land because he does not have the other required avenues. Thus, this conflict between the landlord and the tenant of extracting more and of his problem of still tilling the land is a continuous feature of Indian agriculture. The last feature of the Indian agriculture is that the Indian farmer still uses backward technology. The tractors and the threshers are nowhere in sight, but the Indian farmer relies more on the cattle power and the manpower. We have seen the importance of agriculture, we have seen the features of Indian agriculture, and now we are going to see the problems of Indian agriculture. In fact, it is like the features are themselves the problems of Indian agriculture. There is overlapping of the same issue. The first is that India does not have proper irrigation facilities. This is the first problem that is faced by Indian agricultural sector. The government has not been able to provide permanent irrigation facilities to all the farmers in India. And thus, as we saw in the features, the Indian farmer is forced to rely on monsoon, on rainfall, and the rain gods do not always please the Indian farmers. Thus, sometimes they are happy and most of the time unhappy because monsoon keeps on playing havoc in their life. The second problem faced by the Indian farmer is deficiency of finance. As the production is low, as most of the time the tenants are working on the fields and they're not using the modern technology and they're not using the modern methods, this leads to low productivity and thus the profit which comes out of the fields is very low. So the Indian farmer is always short of money and thus this deficiency of finance makes him a poor farmer. The third problem of the Indian agriculture is that in India, the agriculturists have conventional outlook. That is, they cannot go beyond subsistence farming. They believe they are happy, satisfied if they have sufficient grains for the year. They cannot go forward, they cannot imagine making irrigation as commercial. They do not understand that by growing the commercial crops, they would be able to earn much more than what they are doing. But the Indian farmer remains conventional in his outlook. The next problem of the Indian farmer is it has small and scattered land holdings. As we discussed in the feature, these small land holdings which are scattered, by this the farmer is not able to get the required output and thus he remains poor every time. The second problem, or rather the next problem of the Indian agriculture is that there is lack of organized marketing system. Meaning to say, the India does not have the required number of mandis in the various cities. The Indian farmer is forced to sell its product there and there at whatever rate it gets, because he has deficiency of finance, he does not have the place to store the grains and thus he is forced to sell his agricultural product at the available rates because of the lack of organized marketing system by the government. If there is an organized marketing system by the government, the farmer will get the required rate of his product. Next is exploitative agrarian relations. This again comes from the feature of the Indian agriculture, that is the relation of the landlord and the tenant has always been very sorrowful. It has never been a cordial relationship. The landlords want to extract more, the tenants are becoming poorer and poorer every day. They do not seem to show so much of interest in the fields because of the fact they understand that they are not going to get much out of the share. Thus, this exploitative agrarian relationship of the landlord and the tenant have led to the doom of the Indian agriculture. So, these are the basic problems which are faced by Indian agriculture. To improve the condition of Indian agriculture, the Indian government has resorted to reforms, and there are three basic kind of reforms which have been initiated, and they are technical reforms, the land reforms and the general reforms. And here I am talking about the technical reforms. As far as technical reforms are concerned, the farmers have been encouraged to use the high yielding variety of seeds. That is, the use of those new seeds which will give better productivity. So, this is the first boost which has been given under the technical reforms. The second technical reform is use of chemical fertilizers. Instead of the old age cow dung as the manure, the new composite agricultural chemical fertilizers have been encouraged under this scheme. The third reform is the use of insecticide and pesticides. Earlier, the crops used to get destroyed, but now the modern insecticides and pesticides have seen that the Indian agricultural productivity does not get destroyed because of the insects or the pests. The next reform is scientific farming. Instead of the conventional methods of farming which were used by the Indian farmer, the new scientific farming has been encouraged by the government of India, like the selection of good kind of seeds, crops and the quality of the crop, the preparation of the field and the crop rotation. All these measures resort to just one thing, and that is increase in the productivity of Indian agricultural output. The next technical reform is mechanized means. So the new machines like tractors, threshers and so on have been encouraged by the Indian government, and for this loans are provided by various nationalized banks to the farmers so that the productivity in India increases. So these were about the technical reforms in India. We have seen the technical reforms. Let's move on to the land reforms. And in the land reform, the first reform is abolition of intermediaries. That is, the zamindars who earlier occupied a very important position in the Indian agriculture and who were responsible for collecting the land revenue and who extracted the Indian farmer has been reduced to merely nothing. That is, all those people who acted as middlemen between the government and the farmer, that has been abolished. Now, the farmer pays directly to the government, which means that the extraction is not there and the farmer is giving just the required reform rent to the government. The next feature is regulation of the rent. Earlier, there was no system of actually having the fixed rental system. It used to differ from place to place, from time to time and from person to person. But now the government has ensured that there is a fixed regulation of rent which is 1/3. The next is consolidation of land holdings. As we have seen in the features of the Indian agriculture, that in India the farms are small and scattered. But the government is now using such policies that the land becomes consolidated. That is, it comes to one place. So, by the methods of exchanging the farm with one person to another with the help of the government has given a great impetus to the Indian farmer. Next is ceiling on land holdings. Earlier, there were farmers who had acres and acres of land, and there were farmers who hardly had anything. So the government of India resorted to a policy which is called as ceiling on land holdings. That is, a number has been fixed, that is, you cannot have more than that land, and the excessive land, if at all is there, that is redistributed amongst the landless laborers or the farmers. The next feature is cooperative farming. The Indian government has also encouraged cooperative farming in India because by the cooperative farming there is lesser chance of getting exploited. By this, the Indian farmer stands united and thus he gains because of this cooperation, because of this unity, and can also bargain in the market because of their collective strength. We have seen the technical reforms, we have also seen the land reforms. Let's move on to the general reforms. Under the general reform category, the first reform is expansion of irrigation facilities. Earlier, especially before independence, we did not have the modern required irrigation facilities available to the Indian farmer. But now these facilities have been expanded, and as much as 40.2% of the Indian agricultural field is watered by the irrigation facilities. So, a great achievement in itself. The second general reform is provision of credit to the Indian farmer. The Indian farmer has been given various schemes like the Kisan credit cards and also the other NABARD like the agricultural and rural segments under the bank schemes by which the Indian farmer is able to get the required credit with minimum required number of formalities. The third general reform is regulated markets. As we have seen earlier, the Indian farmer, because of the shortage of storage supply and also because of the need of money immediately, used to sell its produce in the market at whatever rate was available. But now the market is regulated by the government and there are representatives from the farmers themselves who see to it that the market gives them the required rate to the increased product that the farmer is growing. The next general reform is the policy of price support. The government fixes or announces the minimum price for the grains beforehand so that the Kisan or the Indian farmer is not forced to sell its product at the throwaway prices, and the minimum support price is always provided to him. So these were the three reforms which have been initiated by the government of India, the technical, the general and the land reforms, which have given a great boost to the Indian agriculture. Because of the three categories of reforms which have been initiated by the government of India, the Indian agriculture can boast of big achievements. And in the achievements, the first one is rise in the crop productivity. Earlier, the production from the Indian fields was very meager, but now we have lots of food grains which are being grown in the Indian farms and the productivity is amazing. The second achievement is increase in the acreage. That is to say, increase in the land area under cultivation. Now, as much as 17 crore hectares of land is tilled by the Indian farmer because of the irrigation facilities and other such facilities which are being provided by the government of India to the Indian farmer. The third achievement is change in the cropping pattern. From the subsistence farming, that is growing of food grains, the Indian farmer has marched forward to growing commercial crops and also the crop rotation and so on. This has definitely ensured good profit margins to the Indian farmer. Next is change in the outlook of the Indian farmer. From the conventional wisdom, he is moved on to the modern knowledge. Now he uses tractors, threshers, high yielding variety of seeds, manures, fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides, and thus the production definitely has soared. The next achievement is self-sufficiency in food grains. Because of the Green Revolution, the food grains in India have actually risen because the impetus is given to the food grains, as if you remember, we were threatened by US once upon a time that it shall not supply us the required food grains if we did not stop the war with Pakistan. Thus, the impetus which has been laid on the Indian agriculture about the self-sufficiency in food grains has resulted in good spirit. Now, after all these reforms and achievements, definitely we can say that we have moved not only a step but miles ahead. But do you think this is all that we have to achieve? Definitely no. We are looking forward to another green revolution in India to give self-sufficiency to the farmers, to provide food grains to every mouth, to provide irrigation facilities to everybody, and usage of modern technical reforms. Thus, the government has still to make lots of more efforts. And when we hear of the deaths of the Indian farmers, when we see that there is a recurring feature that the government has to write off the loans of the Indian farmers, it gives us a picture that the Indian farmer is still suffering. It still needs a lot of reforms. It still has to produce much more than what it is producing to come to the level of the world agriculture. So that was all about your chapter. Thank you.